What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here. The dawning is upon us, so I thought it would be in the spirit of the season to show off my favorite Stasis build. If you're a fan of the channel, then you may have seen me solo the Birthplace of the Vile Nightfall last week with this same build, and I also soloed the Devil's Lair GM with it last season. But last season, this build wasn't as good as it is now. Stasis got some small buffs with the launch of Season of the Wish, and in my opinion, those changes didn't really move the needle on Stasis as much as they should. But the seasonal artifact mods this season does move the needle on this build. That is thanks to two artifact mods in particular, those being Pillar of Ice and Hail the Storm. Pillar of Ice is crucial to this build as it spawns a stasis crystal when you kill a frozen combatant. And when we touch on the fragments, I will go over why this is so strong. And then we also have Hail the Storm, where shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage, and shattering stasis crystals releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. So the Destiny Data Compendium has given us some extra info on these artifact mods. With Pillar of Ice, you will spawn a stasis crystal for every frozen enemy that you kill, and 2 crystals for frozen bosses. And Hail the Storm deals 12.5% more damage when you shatter an enemy, and 28.6% more damage when you shatter a crystal. So we are getting free damage for doing something that we would be doing a lot anyways, which is shattering frozen stasis crystals and shooting frozen enemies. So how do we freeze these enemies in the first place? Well, let's go over the main focus of the build for that. We're going with the Ultimate Stasis Warlock exotic in the Osmiomancy Gloves. These have the exotic perk Fervid Cold Snap. Your Cold Snap grenades have an additional charge that recharges quicker on direct impact. The Seeker spawned from Cold Snap grenades travels further. So again, the Destiny Data Compendium gives us extra info and says that our Cold Snaps travel 35% further, and they grant us grenade energy back upon hitting or freezing an enemy. This is great as if we land a direct hit on a champion and then freeze it, we basically get our whole grenade charge back. This is especially good on unstoppable champions as we can stun them when we shatter the freeze on them. But then we also get additional functionality for our Cold Snap grenades as we can run them with the Bleak Watcher aspect on Warlock. This allows us to turn our Cold Snap grenades into a stasis turret which shoots enemies and slows them and eventually freezes them. This gives us incredible crowd control, and it's awesome in the tight boss room of the Birthplace of the Vile Nightfall. Seriously, the crowd control from this build is absolutely second to none. It gives our grenades a longer base cooldown, but trust me, with the right setup, you have a grenade up whenever you need it. For our other aspect, we have Ice Flare Bolts. When shattering a frozen target, it spawns Seekers that track and freeze other nearby targets. This is a must-run aspect because your turret can slow and freeze a target, and then when you shoot and kill that target, your Seekers will seek out and freeze the next enemy, and you just keep doing this over and over. And what's more, it can actually proc on itself sometimes. So if you freeze a boss and then shatter the freeze, the Ice Flare Bolts will often seek back to the boss and freeze it again if there are no other enemies around. This is great because shattering the freeze does a lot of damage thanks to the aforementioned Hail the Storm artifact mod. And we can crank up that damage even more with Fragments, specifically Whisper of Rending, where our primary ammo weapons deal 100% increased damage to stasis crystals and 50% increased damage against frozen enemies. So in a regular Lost Sector, I hit 31,346 damage to the head with my bow and 19,615 damage to the body. And then on a frozen target, we hit 27,214 to the body and 44,667 damage to the head. The damage scale is slightly different between crit and body shot, so let's just say it's an extra 40% damage to enemies when they're frozen. But then we throw on Whisper of Rending, and now we are hitting for 67,001 damage to the head and 41,927 to the body. So that is 50% more damage than what it was when the enemy was frozen. But it's a whopping 114% more damage than a base arrow to the head or the body. So more than double the damage. Now, this is a build that is meant for endgame, so I highly suggest running Whisper of Rending. This whole build is overkill in lower end content because there is no need to freeze enemies as they pose little to no threat and they die super easily. But in GMs, you will be able to one-shot basically everything with this build, and that's great. Plus, the enemies are often slowed or frozen, so they won't be able to hurt you. And because they are often never able to deal damage to you, I do not recommend the Fragment Whisper of Torment. This allows us to get grenade energy when we take damage from targets. But to be honest, if you are playing this build properly, you will not be taking much damage at all. So sure, it is a great fragment, especially for a grenade-based build, but for this build in particular, I do not recommend it. But the fragment I do wholeheartedly recommend for grenade recharge is Whisper of Shards, where shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate, and then shattering additional crystals increases the duration of this benefit. plus it adds 10 to our resilience stat. So this is a whopping 500% increase to our base grenade regeneration. And because of Pillar of Ice, pretty much every enemy we are killing is frozen and it will spawn a crystal. So then when we shoot that crystal to deal AoE damage, which is increased by Hail of the Storm, it will also give us a better grenade cooldown when we do that. For destroying one crystal, you get 6 seconds of increased recharge rate, but then shooting another one will take it up to 11 seconds where it maxes out. And the crystals will deal even more damage thanks to the next fragment, Whisper of Fissures. This increases the damage and size of the burst when you destroy a crystal or frozen target. So this gives our AoE even more damage, and it works in conjunction with Hail the Storm. On screen now is the exact damage breakdown from the Destiny Data Compendium, but trust me, this allows our Stasis Shatter damage to be quite effective. Like on the boss in Birthplace of the Vile, by the time I was done killing all the waves of enemies, the boss would often be at like half of his health bar because he would just be taking shatter damage from my stasis turret every so often. So it was just extremely easy passive damage, and as long as I could kill one frozen enemy when the enemy spawned in, then the rest would either take damage and die from the crystal shattering, or they would then be frozen by ice flare bolts and I could easily whittle them down while they are frozen. So this is a must-run fragment with this build. And that brings us to the last fragment, Whisper of Durance. Slows that you apply to targets last longer. For those abilities that linger, their duration will also increase. So this makes our Bleakwatcher turret last for an extra 5 seconds. So 30 seconds total instead of 25. But it also doubles the duration of the slow applied to the enemy, from 4.5 seconds to 9 seconds. That's an extremely long time, and it means that it has more time to shoot other enemies and come back and shoot the initial enemy and apply enough slow to freeze it. So I highly recommend this fragment as well, as it buffs the main aspect of this build, which is to have turrets up at all times, slowing every enemy. I truly couldn't believe how effective this build was at ad control. And the mods that you can apply to this build make it that much better. So on the helmet, I run a Stasis Siphon and a Solar Siphon mod, but this can easily be changed out depending what your primary of choice is. And then I run a Heavy Ammo Finder. I strongly recommend an Exotic Primary with this build because they are great for quickly deleting the frozen targets, and then you will get lots of heavy bricks thanks to the Heavy Ammo Finder. On the gloves, we have Grenade Kickstart. Sadly, this mod was nerfed in Season of the Wish, but you still want it here as a means of using up your armor charge and having even more grenades at your disposal. Then run Bolstering Detonation and Momentum Transfer for more rift and melee energy when you deal damage with a grenade. Your Bleakwatchers are constantly dealing little bits of damage, so this is a no-brainer to run here as it will allow you to have your abilities up almost constantly. On the robes, just run whatever resistance is most needed for the activity. On the boots, a scavenger for your heavy of choice is great here, as is innervation for grenade energy back when you pick up an orb of power. Recuperation or better already could also be nice for survivability, as Stasis doesn't have any form of self-healing outside of a healing rift. And then on the class item, I have 2 bomber mods and a distribution mod for lots of grenade energy every time I cast a rift. With this mod setup, I guarantee you will have a Bleakwatcher up for pretty much every engagement. For weapons, I love pairing this build with Verglas Curve. Exotic bows are great and high in content as they hit really hard on red bars, and this one has the added bonus of being able to make stasis crystals. So even when we lose Pillar of Ice next season, this build will still have a way to make crystals to take advantage of the AoE and extra damage from Whisper of Fissures, and the fast grenade cooldown thanks to Whisper of Shards. And this season, it has Unstoppable Bow as well, so this is the best pairing in my opinion. However, a solar primary like Sunshot also goes extremely hard, especially this season with how great the artifact is for solar weapons. But you could pair the bow with something like an Ikelos Sniper with this build to be able to proc Radiant whenever you like. Grenade launchers with disorienting grenades are also very good for even more ad control, but I actually really liked running it with a Reservoir Burst fusion rifle. When the enemies are frozen, you can pop a fusion shot into them, and then the AoE from the stasis crystals plus Reservoir Burst is really nice. So yeah, run what you like. But if you really want to hone in on the freezing fantasy, then go with Verglas Curve. Polaris Lance would also be great with this build, as it is an exotic primary and can give you Radiant on demand. So if it is ever Stasis and Solar Burn together, this would go really hard. And speaking of that, when I soloed Birthplace of the Vile, it wasn't even Stasis Surge. So if it was, I would have been doing an additional 25% damage to everything. So keep that in mind. And one more thing, I did also have Solo Operative on, so I was dealing an additional 15% more damage. Definitely run Solo Operative if you're solo with this build, or any build really. An Overload rocket launcher is also really nice, though you can take out overloads completely with your bow if they are the only enemy around. That is because if there are no other enemies to shoot, then the stasis turret will keep slowing the champion over and over. and slow disrupts overloads. So you can deal with both overloads and unstoppables with this build without any champion mods on your weapons. And barrier as well, but that does take a lot more finesse and timing to freeze them over and over again. I want to talk about another nuance with this build, and that is the super. This super actually lasts a very long time if you aren't casting out the freezing crystals, so you can send out 2 Bleak Watchers to freeze everything, and when the enemies are frozen, just pulse your blast to shatter them. And then any enemies still alive will get frozen by Ice Flare bolts, and you can cast out another Shockwave Blast, and just keep doing this over and over. This is awesome, as the super does not do great damage on its own, but this allows you to get the most out of it. I gotta say, I was extremely impressed with how well this build performed in endgame content. The master version of the Birthplace of the Vile is actually harder than the GM thanks to the bullshit modifier that prevents you from regenning your health. And the Void Overshields on the raiders in the boss room is really annoying. Though if you are able to freeze them, they go down easy. But they do that immune bullshit where they run under the ground and will spawn right on top of you, hence why I went with a Void Fusion Rifle so I could take them down quickly when they did this. But unless enemies can go immune, there really is not much escape they can do with this build. And even the immunity totems that the boss spawns, enemies can still be frozen. You can't damage them, but it still prevents them from attacking you. So it is even strong in that regard. And that pretty much covers every single thing there is to know about this build. I can't stress enough how great it is for ad control. The buffs from the artifact also kind of improve Stasis' worst quality, which is, why would I freeze enemies when I can simply kill them? Void Weaken Grenades and Solar Sunbrace's build are great at just deleting enemies before they can even get going, so Stasis has been made somewhat ineffective thanks to our power creep. But specifically in a Nightfall like Birthplace of the Vile, where you often have to deal with enemies in various different areas, and if you can't spawn kill them right away, you're in big trouble, this build excels. So give it a try and let me know how you like it. And if you want more awesome build videos like this one, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my future uploads. Some of you want a new and improved Dawn Chorus build, so that may be my next one. But trust me, I have lots of great builds cooked up and I'm excited to bring them to you. Lastly, if you're still watching, then thanks so much for watching to the end. It means a lot. Happy freezing, Guardians, and take care.